Go back to that.
Audio at this time. So acknowledging that we are proceeding without benefits.
I can now hear. Oh.
Can you hear us now, Director McNaughton?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can. Thank you. We can hear you.
I'll tell you about the snake with two heads at a later time. Missed that. We did talk about that. Well, I will say the synopsis of what you missed is placemaking activity has resulted in capital investment in the downtown area, and we could consider that for our community. You'll go to the next slide. Some just general demographics about the city itself, 71,000. You can read those on the left-hand side. Obviously, the home prices are less than you have here. I will also mention that the metropolitan statistical area, while the city itself only has 71,000, is upwards of 1.4 million. So it is a much larger community than what we actually have. Some probably 7 to 8 times if you look at it, because that includes like upstate South Carolina, but I guess Greenville proper has about 500,000, I would say. So, 4 to 5 times our community in terms of size. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see one of the common themes that we noticed. They had a water they have a water feature that kind of runs through their city, but instead of just letting it be natural, they turned this area into a park. You can see that it was water that was actually used for a purpose, not just flowing through the city, and they decided to use it as a feature and an attraction. You can see the capital that has been invested on both sides of the river. What's that? Well, actually, this is just one of the smaller tributaries. We're going to get to the mill later on. Director Shreve. So this is a larger, you'll see a different version of the one you're talking about, but you're right on. It's in Greenville. Next slide, please. Some of the themes that we saw that we're not going to dig into detail, but everywhere we went with different speakers, there was some commonality that was being said. The first was they have significant race-based inequities throughout, including both employment and healthcare and income. They have an astronomical growth rate. I don't remember what ours is, Mr. Walker, but 2 to 2.5%. But if you see by 2040, they're expecting growth of 40%, and we don't get to that number. So they're running into issues of growth that we're not exactly facing quite as bad as a community.
Do you know offhand if there's a single factor driving that, or?
But we don't know if there's a single factor. I would say what I heard most frequently is they are a center for employment, and they're also a center for entertainment. And so they've become an attractive place to live. Is that a fair thing that you say? Fair. Okay. And then they have some of the same issues we have here with housing inventory, and they also have a lot of NIMBYism. And those were common themes that we heard that I share with you. Now, if we'll get into a little bit of the details about economic development stuff. As you know, we've been working on firing up something called Venture Central and trying to turn ideas into brick and mortar places. I'll share with you that Greenville has their own version of that, and it's called Next. And it's the next opportunity. It's the next opportunity to grow, and they measure the results of that. It's their version of an innovation and entrepreneur ecosystem. They're a couple of years more advanced than we are in building an ecosystem, so much so that they actually have a 60,000 square foot space that's kind of shared space and subsidized rent for folks who have, startup businesses and looking for, a less expensive place to run their business until they can stand on their own 2 feet. I will say that their executive director, a guy named Eric Weissman, spoke to us about what's happening in our community. And there are similarities in where they were 3 to 4 years ago, what we're facing today. And that would be, some of those similarities include nonprofits being concerned of cannibalizing the amount of resources. So they're not necessarily working together as best they can. They're more interested in their own self-survival. It also, there's some understanding about the roles and responsibilities of their existing ecosystem operators. You know, we call them the alphabet soup here, you know who they are, but if you ask the folks around here, do they provide an incubator space or office space, you might get a yes, but then when you go to investigate, you find out it's a single office next to a copier in a bathroom. There's not really shared space, but if you ask them, they would say they have, you know.
Could they come up with a formula that they like regarding who is eligible and how their tenure is shaped as far as length of tenure there in the subsidized space, when they boot them out and when they can stand on their own, those kind of thorny questions?
Yeah, they do. And I don't have all of those prepared for today. I'll be happy to share that with you. But in essence, it's this is incubation space, which means generally when you've been there long enough to get a minimal viable product and start producing it, you're still eligible to be in incubation. Once that product is time to scale, meaning that you're going from producing one widget that's unique to thousands of widgets that you're going to sell in an area, you move from incubation to acceleration. And so it's time for you to move on. Like at some point, you got to get out of the nest and go grow on your own. And when you get into acceleration, that's the general idea when you're no longer eligible to work there. So I don't know, I don't remember the details about timing and number of employees. I think it's more where you are in the process. And I'll check on the terms, but there were terms associated with it, Director Shreve, like no more than X amount of years type thing. Like if your business is not moving on, then you're not for us. Because they focus on growth companies, not necessarily, you know, mom and pop Main Street business.
That was my other question. Yeah, it sounds like they would, given that criteria, they would have to focus on growth companies and high tech.
That's right. And I don't think we're going to get into this much, but one of the other things that's happening in Greenville that's not necessarily here is they have an 85 corridor that is just lined up with large businesses, BMW, 27,000 employees, Airbnb, Michelin. And we'll get into how that's important in public-private partnerships later, but it's a unique paradigm shift on how we do it here. There's two universities down there that impact the Greenville proper area. It's the University of Clemson and Furman. And we heard mostly from Furman, but before I get into Furman, I'll just mention that the University of Clemson has their MBA program located in downtown Greenville. And it was noted by several of the speakers that that town and gown relationship was healthy for the downtown area. That although that there wasn't a large presence of students associated, the types of students that go through that program were good for the downtown commerce, not just vibrancy, but for other reasons, innovation, working with other existing companies.
Case studies and cocktails, as they say, right? So there's a lot of traffic at the bars.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was in that order. It might have gone with cocktails first, but to your point. And then Furman University, it was real interesting for me, and I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but there was a dichotomy of how Furman was seen by the downtown folks and how Furman saw themselves helping downtown. In particular, we had several speakers who said Furman's campus was 6 or 7 miles removed from downtown, and they might as well have been 100 miles removed. They're not part of the network, and those students don't really come downtown. And then we heard from leaders at Furman who said, we're actively participating in helping the downtown area, and our students are helping with the nightlife. So I'm not sure which one's true or not. What's that? I'm just saying that, you know, it's interesting that we got polar opposites and opinions there. And I'll say that the common theme, though, that we heard was both Clemson and Furman had a seat at the table when it came to innovation and entrepreneurship, and in different ways. Furman is creating an innovation campus. I think they're calling it RAIN. It's still in the idea formation, but they're going to build a place that's near the campus, but it's also community facing, so anyone can participate. It seems to me it's still more of an ideal than a thought out plan, but that's where they are in the process. And they're going to plug into the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. I'll just call it umbrella of Next. And it's going to also connect with venture capital funders and others that already have a presence down there. And we mentioned earlier about the issue of inequities as it relates to race and demographics. And the chamber is trying to provide one solution for that. And they created a minority business accelerator some 10 years ago. And they have had over 100 businesses go through that particular program. And some of them are, it's expensive to go through the program. So the chamber subsidizes it through philanthropy. And then some scenarios, they just automatically gift the whole scholarship to go through the program. But it's been successful in terms of creating small startup minority businesses in the community.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, Roger, that they made the comment that they didn't have a very strict interpretation of what a minority was.
Yeah, meaning it could be women, for example, it could be,
That's right.
you know, they intend to be, for it to be inclusive, not just a race demographic.
You mentioned VC and that one bullet point, was there a significant venture capital network there?
I'm gonna say no, not in the way we think about venture capital, where people raise funds and invest in, you know, exit strategies. There does seem to be a lot of institutional investors, which are related to all the industry down there, who sort of invest in not necessarily companies, but the mission of certain organizations that support these startups. Right. And the mayor, I'm getting a little bit off here, but the mayor has been in his position for over 20 years now. So they have a continuity of leadership that's much different than our community. And it's understood part of the mayor's role is to raise funds for what is in the best interest of that community. So we're not going to get into art, or we're not going to get into parks, but so forth. But the parks that we visited, for example, there's the ABB Children's Playground and the, BMW swing set, if you will, and XYZ hiking trails. And they sell it off, those naming rights, to pay for public stuff. So it's a
School
different.
system one time that gave naming rights to their stairwells. Not locally, but I'm just saying, it's the same sort of thing, naming rights.
I mean, and so some of these companies invest in missions, so they will invest in like these startups and angel funds to help for seed money. It's not venture capital the way we think of it. And the connectivity with venture capital doesn't seem to be mature, is how I would call it. When you think about like Boston or, San Fran or Austin, it's not like
Either that or it just launched itself in a bear market and went nowhere. Yeah.
I mean, are a lot of the startups sort of automotive related or related to that area? I mean, because you could see how BMW, whatever, those companies would invest in startup ideas and companies to sort of grow that support infrastructure for that.
There is some of that.
Mhm.
But I got the feeling that they were more agnostic to the types of startups, and they would support anybody that, had a reasonable idea to go through these
So the
programs.
main BMW factory is in Spartanburg, right? But what do they have in Greenville?
Well, it's called Greenville Spartanburg, I guess. So it's
Okay.
all one, it's not exactly.
It's all one.
Yeah.
But it's I can't tell you where the line is, the political lines are. So it may be actually in Spartanburg, to your point, but it's all part of the same local economy.
Fair Count Clemson is part of Greenville.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
pretty big.
yes. And they left out Wofford.
I'd say the biggest takeaway I would want you to hear is the way they engage the community to help solve public problems in a way that our community does not. If you think about some of the larger employers that we have here, we've not tapped into the resources that they may have to promote economic development the way they have in Greenville. And economic development also being classified as bringing new wealth into the community. Interestingly, in the downtown Greenville area, they have what's known as the Peace Center. And the Peace Center came from the Peace family. It's not named after peace itself. And they were given a $30 million gift to launch a fundraising campaign. And then they funded what you see on the right-hand side, which is the Peace Center. It has a 2,700 capacity seating in the main area, and it has several smaller areas, which are half in size or quarter in size. And so it's designed to handle more upscale type of venues than our community generally can host. And it also has the ability to scale in a way our community does not. And the reason I tell you that is from an economic development perspective, when you think about places like this or the Durham Performing Arts Center, it has a huge financial impact on the community. And in fact, they did a study and it has an $80 million annual estimated impact to the local economy. Just by having acts there, people come in, see the acts, spend a lot of money in that area, and then go home. So just a fuel for thought for what may be important in ours. I thought this may be the biggest takeaway for me is just about everything you see in the skyline on the right and throughout, not all things, but most things were built through public-private partnerships. That was their primary tool for building their community in a dense way and having everything being served by infrastructure in a more effective way. And they had some unique ways of doing it. You know that we have the Enable grant and we have some tax increment finance or synthetic tax increment financing, but they did it in a couple other ways that may be germane to our community. One example is the public-private partnership is not always tax increment financing. It's also having those big industries bring money to the table. The private part is not just in what you see, the buildings themselves, but the BMWs of the world giving philanthropic donations to make a public good happen. So some of the trails that we'll show you, parks and other things that make the area pretty cool are really financed by the existing industry that are there who want to create a place for employees and for future recruitment.
And the city foots the bill for the more pedestrian things like sewage and drainage. Is that what?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's in the next, in fact, I'll jump to the Hyatt Hotel because I thought this was unique. They had some property that they own and they turned it into a park, and it's in the downtown center city. And they decided that as a park, they had the ability to put in infrastructure, and then they let the Hyatt Hotel build on it. And when the Hyatt Hotel did that, it included like some urban parks. So it was a brick area, where you had tables outside where people could grab their coffee and go sit and read the newspaper or do the downtown area. And it's a way they turned a park into an attraction for capital. So they still, I believe, still own the land, and Hyatt, I think, has like a 50-year lease or something of that associated with it, but it's still a park in downtown. But the reality is it was a unique way of using an existing asset to attract additional capital. Before we go to the next one, Megan, can you come back? I wanted to make one more statement. They being the city had a vision created some 30, 40 years ago. And we talked about the continuity of leadership, but it was also the continuity of planning, much the way this county plans very well with its comprehensive plan. By staying true to the plan, they found greater success. And one of those in the downtown area was requiring new developments to have some kind of housing component. So most everything that you see downtown has not only like the retail on the ground floor or the commercial office space, but a couple floors up, there's housing associated with it. And now they have over 5,000 residents living in the downtown area, which helps feed the vibrancy of what's happening down there. And if you include affordable housing, they just have a sort of a set agreement that will include tax increment financing if you'll put at least 20% affordable housing into it. It's not exactly economic development the way we have it defined today, but certainly has an ancillary benefit.
And Roger, just to add to that, it's mixed use everywhere and PPPs everywhere. What I found fascinating was with the stadium, the Red Sox stadium, they require residential apartments in that stadium. They didn't even remember. You said there's residential.
Red Sox says, we're not going to build, we don't do apartment, or we don't
If you
do
said, well, you
condos.
will,
Because
you're gonna
you're
do
gonna,
it.
if you want to do it here, you're gonna,
Fascinating. And let me just add this because I found this fascinating.
no parking.
No parking for that stadium. They said, we're not building any parking, no big parking area. The churches around there rent out their parking spaces during ball
It's
games.
a big money.
Make a lot of
Well, they
money. for
were the first to
churches and
complain.
that. It's real, so they built a stadium with no parking, but with residential in it. I mean, it's thinking out of the box and really, I thought that was really cool.
And some of those like empty spaces or church parking lots
Right.
who were complaining about no parking to begin with are now
Very happy.
very happy that they have moved on their street.
Just a way of looking at things very differently. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. And then I think the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway I want you to have are the next two pictures. If you would, Megan. So what you see here is a road built by the South Carolina Department of Transportation that goes over top of a river. And this is the river you were mentioning. Upstream from this river was a mill, Director Shreve, that used to feed down. And they would say, as they changed the color of the dye upstream, the river would literally change color. Well, that mill eventually went defunct, and then it just became normal, sort of greenish bluish water, not the greatest in the world. But before we get into the next picture, there's a story that goes along with this that I found fascinating, so I'm going to share it. There was a garden club in Greenville, South Carolina, who said, "Hey, we're covering up this beautiful waterfall. Let's see if we can uncover it, and so the community can enjoy it." And she went to meet with the mayor at the time, same mayor that we were talking about today, I guess. And he says, "All right, well, we'll take a look at it and we'll go talk to the South Carolina DOT." And she goes, the garden club lady basically said, "Oh, well, she's one of my best friends. She had just taken over the South Carolina DOT. I'll call her." And so the South Carolina DOT came down to Greenville to take a look at this bridge. And fast forward a year or so, and the South Carolina DOT said, we're just going to tear down this bridge and we're going to abandon the easement. So, I mean, so I'm not abandoning, you can have the easement. And so what that resulted in is what you'll see in the next picture. And so now you see how that waterfall is uncovered, and you'll see what was a roadway is now a suspension bridge for pedestrians. And you can't, from this angle, you can't tell, but there's park space running all underneath sort of the suspension bridge. And all of the development that you see sort of in the background to your left, and you can't see to your right, was a direct result of those folks finding their falls, right? And so, the biggest takeaway I had from that community, and I've shared with Doug, and we shared with Doug, I guess, is our community needs to find our falls. And I'm not by falls in terms of a waterfall, but what's the central masterpiece that we can leverage to attract private capital, improve the quality of life, build the things that the community wants, and everybody sort of wins.
I forgot, was that bridge a modestly used city street, or was it an avenue to?
It was a South Carolina DOT owned street. So it wasn't, and then there the city and county and state owned. This was a state owned
It
street.
was a state highway.
State highway. And there were the mayor said there were complaints everywhere about how will I get to work? How will this? And as soon as it was shut down, there was never a complaint. People found another way to go. There were no traffic issues. All that noise went away. And that's one of the things about having not a strong mayor in the way strong mayor means in strong that they run the city. Strong mayor in being he has a strong voice in what happens because of his legacy, and he would just power through those types of things in a way that's not easy for our politicians to do. He didn't really have to worry about the fear of not being elected the next cycle. It was understood that he was going to be able to go through that, and I think it allowed him to be more candid and more forward in a way that is very difficult for local politicians here. And I'm speaking from my perspective. If I misspeak, then you
Well,
tell
as
me.
somebody who spent probably 50 years in the VDOT world, in Virginia world, VDOT, it was amazing to me that they convinced VDOT, their dot to take down a bridge, right? The other thing I will add, and it was all about networking, right? Relationships and networking. The other thing I found fascinating was that the city went through within their city limits and picked the roads that they wanted control over because they wanted to control the way they looked. They wanted them landscaped, they wanted trees on them, they wanted wide sidewalks. And so within the city limits, they have a mix of DOT owned and maintained roads and city owned and maintained roads, which is very different from any model we have. It's kind of interesting. Now, expensive. But very, very different model within the Department of Transportation.
It seems South Carolina structurally is, there's a county and then the city sits over top
Yes.
of it.
Yes, that's right. It's not as.
It's not like Virginia.
Right.
And-
It's not still rural state.
And, you know, no other state really is like Virginia with transportation either, going back to the, you know, the Byrd administration in the 1920s where that was the thing, you know, and the state took over and hasn't relinquished control since. Most other places, they're more cooperative.
So I think JT was the one that suggested we clarify. So we're sharing this for informational purposes in hopes that you will think through what you just heard today. And as we move forward with Project Enable 2.0 update, if you feel strongly about some of the things that you've seen that you'd like us to do for our community, we gladly welcome that feedback through the process. And that concludes what I had to say about our benchmarking trip. If there's any other comments, Supervisor McKeel or?
Well, I'm just looking through my notes. I thought it was a couple of the comments, and I'll just let them stand on their own. The mayor and one of the city councilors we talked to said, we don't make any changes for tourism. Don't do or make changes for tourism. You have to do it for your residents,
Also appreciate.
and then the tourists will come. I thought that was really, because we have CACVB and we're very focused on our tourism, and I'm not saying that's bad, but it was a different way to look at tourism. He also, a couple of other comments that I had in there. The chamber president said there's been a significant investment in the postcard of Greenville, but there's a flip side to every postcard. We have a world-class city, but we do not have world-class systems. Interesting to think about that a little bit, about what he meant by
By that he meant
systems.
delivery of basic public services.
The other thing, a couple of just other, and I'll be quick about this because I know we have to get, but they were very clear that several decades ago, economic development was a dirty word. Their community did not want economic development. It was a dirty word. City leaders now describe an ED culture where businesses succeed and people prosper. City has gone from surviving to thriving. Now, they may be on the cusp of too much growth. I don't know, but I mean, it was very interesting to hear some of these comments. And let me just see what else I had here. They ensured at least 10% of all new housing was income restricted. Preserved as much as 35% of their vacant land as open land or parkland, getting to kind of what we're trying to do here with, with our rural areas. And then let's see what else. There was something here about gentrification I was trying to find that out because of my district I was interested in. They also,
But they feel it's happening.
here, affordable housing trust and tax incentives for developers, reduce parking requirements, equal more density. City bought and invested in land in specific neighborhoods to avoid gentrification.
So how does that work?
Well, we'd have to get down into it, but yeah, exactly. We're just taking a couple of my takeaways here. And I will say that one of the things I found interesting was you could walk, I think Main Street was probably 8 blocks,
8 or 10 blocks.
8 to 10 blocks, something like that. You could walk down there, Main Street, and not even see a parking garage. They were there, back in the back. But, but you didn't even see them, which was lovely. And there was one.
Were they free or did you pay for them?
Free on weekends for public parking.
Right.
paid during the week. I believe I'm correct on that, Roger.
You are, I'll just add though, they don't have any parking meters, so there was some public parking on the streets where that are not metered.
And one of the things they did in Baton Rouge when I lived there was they had, as part of some development schemes, they put in parking and they did that. They tucked it on the perimeter, so it wasn't in the middle of everything. Expecting people to park and then walk. So encouraging pedestrian use,
Mhm.
putting in wider sidewalks on it, but they insisted that they all be free on the perimeter.
Right, yeah. And the parking that they put along Main Street was not parallel, it was pull-in, so you could get more cars, yeah. anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. So you could get more cars, obviously. I also thought that the mayor said, you can do density without it looking like density. You just have to be thoughtful.
The conundrum they may face, and this is just impressionistic because I've only been there a handful of times in recent years, is that when they do all the good stuff in the city and for those few blocks and reserve public space and install parks and all that, the conundrum they face is then they have sprawl in the suburbs, you know.
The county is 500,000.
Yeah, because of that population and the growth and the prosperity that helps feed the city, but at the same time leads to an inevitable.
Yeah, I think that's,
sprawl
I mean, just based off of what I saw, that's accurate. They're already
Yeah.
facing sprawl, and they were talking about the issues the county were facing associated with ingress.
And so there's a real dichotomy in character between, the county and the town.
This is not for economic development. I find it fascinating. I'm gonna mention it anyway. So they sort of have a homeless issue downtown that would be much worse than what we face, I would say. So they have a professional worker, I'll call him for lack of a better term, who spends all their time downtown dealing directly with those folks. And it required the feedback we heard was it required a minimum of 5 engagements before any of those folks who mental health, housing, whatever the issues they were facing, could they then get those homeless folks to go find the resources that are available and help them get to those resources. It's like a dedicated psychologist who that's their sole job to work with the homeless down
Yeah,
there.
and they're getting ready to hire another one.
So it's just an interesting model, like, hey, you got to go where the problems are, you got to go trust, they're not going to come to us, we got to go. So anyway, that's not necessarily directly economic development, but you understand how that
But it's related.
is related.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And with education, of course, you know me, so I went, looked at the education piece or took some notes on it. They have partnerships between their public schools, their technical college and businesses. And they really had an effort of trying to prepare students for the world of work before high school graduation. Their chamber coordinates over 100 juniors and seniors annually in paid business internship programs, which is really different. Anyway, I'll stop, but very interesting.
I think you mentioned this already, is one of the legal parameters on this that affects the strategy. It's the city-county relationship. In your visit, you're mostly talking about urban design and
That's
urban economic development. And in our setting, much of that would be done near where we're working now. So what I want to ask for strategy formulation is, do you think in terms of helping to deploy or encourage our city partner to deploy more of these kinds of things? Or do you think that some of these things are replicable in more urban areas of the county now?
I would say, for example, the Broadway blueprint, some of these strategies could be the Broadway corridor, it could be emphasized. Some of the where is our falls, I don't think would land in the city. It would there's probably some riverfront areas and or some other areas in our community that we could not turn our backs to and accent. I don't know exactly where they are. Hopefully you guys may know what the hidden gems are in our community. And when I say falls, it could be a mountain, it could be, I'm just using that as a generic term that we could use to become, what's that? Yeah.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna say I feel like what I've talked about is applicable to the county. There's some other things that are city-based that when you think about parking and those types of things, there's ways we could incorporate it into what we're doing. whether it's downtown Crozet, whether it's the Rio Road area.
I hear that. It's
Yeah.
just, it makes it harder strategically to have to deliver all of this at the county level with the powers that we have and without the smaller layer of incorporation. I'm thinking, you know, I have not been to Greenville or Athens or Burlington, but some of the other kind of Annapolis, Newport, Rhode Island, Asheville, North Carolina, Huntsville, Alabama, that I think of as tiers that I've been to, or internationally, Cambridge, Dubrovnik. There's a layering of government that lets you zoom in and be more accountable and focus those investments. And then the county or its equivalent can do other things. And it just, to do that without the town or everywhere else except Virginia City structure, just makes it a taller order for us. So we need to recognize that challenge.
And you may be aware that the city recently hired someone to rewrite their strategic economic development plan. And that the UVA Foundation is currently doing their master planning. I think Don's going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And the county has a seat at the table. So I don't think it's an either or proposition. I think we're going to we'll be able to talk about how do we partner together and have the same, maybe it's the same public-private partnership policies and how our housing things are aligned and those things, so that we're working concert. Like, as you know, economy doesn't care about political boundaries. The money travels back and forth. So, oftentimes what's good for the downtown economy is good for us and vice versa.
Definitely.
And so we work closely with the city on many of theirs, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to have a seat at the table when they're writing their strategic plan. They'll have a seat here, and then we're also working with the foundation on their redesign and the UVA economic development. So that's a long way of saying I don't think it's all either or. It's more a collaborative approach to what's good for one can be good for all. All right. I wanted to give you a little bit up on an update on Venture Central. It's a big part of the county's economic development strategy. Things are still going well. As I mentioned last time, they received a $300,000 grant for some DEI work, and we're working through the process to see how to make that come to fruition. I will say that the existing executive director was Alex Andrew. He was on loan, for lack of a better term, from the federal government, and he is now going back to Sri Lanka. So he has left the organization. And if you'll go to the
Our
next.
federal government or the Sri
And so we've hired an interim executive director. Rahul comes to us for.
England didn't work in Sri Lanka.
I don't know how this happened, but somehow he's an attorney and he got through the hiring process anyway. But he's I guess a professor adjunct maybe at the UVA law. He owns his own firm, and he's also spent a healthy portion of his life helping startups, particularly with nonprofits, but completely understand also some for-profits. So he had a wealth of experience as it relates to helping companies not only form, but also find funding. So he's agreed to be the interim executive director while we either put out a search for a new director and or maybe rewrite the plan for what's needed for our community. But I wanted you to recognize the name and the role that he's playing that's important for our strategy, and eventually bump into him in your travels around the county. Lastly, I was going to turn it over to the director here, the chair here, if you would, to talk about the North Fork update, and perhaps Deputy County Manager Walker to talk about his participation in what's happening in North Fork.
Yes, so on November 1st, the UVA Foundation had what do they call it, a community engagement session with a variety of people throughout the community. The foundation is trying to come up with a strategic plan for North Fork and also with some other properties, but primarily it was related to North Fork property. And they've got their own board members, their own sort of strategic planning group, but they invited a number of folks. I don't know, 100 people.
It was a good number of people. Yeah.
And it was at the Boar's Head in the big pavilion and the big room over there. from the county, I was there, Samantha was there, Doug and Roger were all there, and we had people from all over UVA, people from the foundation, other tenants there. And they had some facilitators from, what's the group at UVA that?
Something performance optimization, strategic.
It's
and
in-house, right?
They're in-house folks.
Their sole goal is to make meetings effective and get out of it.
And I had no idea how a meeting with 100 people for strategic planning was gonna go. I know if I had been in charge of it, how it would have gone. And I did not have high expectations, but they did a really good job of engaging people, and we won't talk about all the different things they did, but they got ideas in different ways, got feedback on ideas both from big picture sense. In fact, one of the things that we talked about was placemaking and, you know, ideas, and a lot of the things that came out of the discussion that Roger just brought up were things that came up to very little ideas, you know, what can we do right away? And one of the tenants says you need to bring back the soft pretzels that we used to have. So that was like one of the immediately implementable ideas. So I think it was good. I think we had a chance to share our thoughts. I think it's, you know, as we think about the areas in the county that placemaking can happen and that we can have a role to play and that the county can influence. I mean, there are obviously different places, downtown Crozet, other places, but this is an area that can be shaped in a way that working together, I think, could make something happen with it. Admittedly, there's not much there now, and they're really trying to figure out what they're going to do. So I thought it went well. I thought it was good. Gave us a chance to meet folks. We had an opportunity to meet the new dean for the School of Continuing Professional Studies, who has just recently moved here, who's got a lot of experience. She worked at Virginia Tech and at JMU in the sort of university economic development world with building those relationships. So I think that's a good opportunity. UVA obviously has some interest there. So I think it was a good session. We'll see what they were meeting afterwards, the actual group. So I think it was good, and I think we got a lot out of it. I hope they got a lot out of it. So,
Any discussion about lease rates and rent and things like that, or?
not in the specifics. I think, you know, there was discussion about if you want things to happen, you know, having cheaper rates is a way.
In the commentary.
Yeah.
Sure.
Lower your rates.
The rent is too damn high.
Sorry.
So, and we've had some discussions with them about different ideas as well over the course of the summer. And I think, you know, now this strategic planning process is taken over. But yes, those comments were made.
To include the sale of land and to include strategies of allowing for an anchor tenant, which, you know, you subsidize rent for the first big one in there and then plan to make money from those, you know, sort of how people do target, if you will. Target usually pays less and everybody else pays the rest, so to speak. Those were different strategies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that the design was effective in mixing people up and moving us around, and I think getting a diversity of thought to the extent that there was diversity in the room, which I didn't think there was a whole lot, frankly. But I just think the design was good. I guess the biggest takeaway for me was how different my language was with regard to what it takes to develop property from an infrastructure standpoint, roads, water, sewer. And the UVA are much more
Superficial.
well, yeah, or internal looking. They're talking about, you know, faculty and staffing levels and, you know, things that kind of make
The assumption is that stuff's gonna be there.
it's going to be there. And it was, you know, it was just a very interesting kind of juxtaposition, and then probably the value, I would think, of putting us all together, where we're, you know, kind of talking past each other to a degree. But again, if it's effective, then they're going to capture all of that and kind of do a mashup and come up with something that speaks to all audiences. We'll see. It'll be a tall challenge.
One of the things I heard in several of my groups was everyone is so siloed. We're talking about the university. And there was really a sense that, from my viewpoint, we were living in different worlds. That makes sense. That the university people are in a different world than we're in. I guess kind of
Yeah.
what you're saying, I'm just saying it a different way. And the discussions were about how can we break down those silos and work together and have everybody understanding.
I'll add some, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, but I thought it was worthwhile. I agree with Doug. I looked around and they were talking about the importance of diversity and I was looking around the room thinking. Now, there were women and there were men.
Yeah, it was not.
That was the
apparent to me.
diversity.
You know, I see what you mean, yeah,
Yes.
the kind of, it was beyond just UVA people, but
Yes,
beyond that, yes.
it was really didn't represent.
And most certainly not class-wise, I would imagine.
I mean, bring those folks in, yeah. And when with the discussion, just to get to your point, the discussion certainly came up several times about the cost of their space, you know, and that was met with sort of, and that's okay. I mean, I get it, but it was said numerous times.
Yeah, so it was captured.
Mhm.
So a real world example of what I heard Deputy County Executive Walker, Supervisor McKeel say would be some of the ideas that we were putting forth were how do we leverage this university for the public good? At the same time, people at the table were saying, hey, we got all these spaces we're renting for our back office people. Let's just move them all up to. So the rent goes from here to there and we fill up the buildings. Or UVA Medical's building something, maybe we can move that there. It was just those are real world examples.
Very transactional.
Very transactional of how we're viewing it from a different lens, yeah.
And we at Firm Robotics will be running an autonomous shuttle service at the North Fork. So that'll be, and I think Nick was at this. Where's it?
Yeah, I think that was mentioned.
Nick
actually.
Bilkowski, so yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
And the shuttle's running, is what you said,
it's going to start on December 12th.
December 12th.
So we had a lot of interest from, other constituents at the research park. So
Exciting, John. That's good.
it's
to know that.
expanding,
Mhm.
Monorail was also mentioned, so you want to put that in.
Yeah, you better be careful if they build a monorail down.
I don't know if Monorail's gonna make the cut.
Well, I was born in Morgantown, West Virginia. They have a successful monorail.
They tried that over at Blue Ridge. Remember when they tried that in this community from the medical center to Blue Ridge?
PRT, they call
That was shot down really.
it. Yeah.
All right, so we will, that process is gonna continue along. And then I guess we'll hear as things go on.
Yeah, we'll re-engage again, I'm sure. This group will in particular. I'm not sure about everybody else in the room.
All right, any other new business?
No, sir.
Any unfinished business?
Did you want to make any comments about Lewis and Clark? Is there? Okay.
No.
The Explorers or the
Yeah.
Center.
And then other matters, the 2023 meeting dates. Richie, or I guess they came with the meeting packet, all of the dates for next year. I think what we'll do is vote on those at the next meeting to approve the calendar. So if everybody can just take a look at them, confirm that they look okay, we'll approve them at the December meeting. And everybody remember the December meeting is a week early on the 13th. Anything else? All right, thank you, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.
Is it popping up there now?
And I think we already have that. It's already on our calendar. December 13th, so that's it.
Yeah, I think we can.